So the Orlando Magic, as we all know, were huge sellers in this year's NBA trade deadline. And so what was already one of the worst teams in the league thanks to injuries is now in complete tank mode. This is a direction a lot of people have felt the Magic should go in for some time now, and they've finally done it. They've only had one winning record since 2011, and that was when they went 42-40 in 2019, where they swiftly lost in 5 games to the Toronto Raptors. The next year, they did make the playoffs, but it was with a 33-40 record thanks to the shortened season. Nevertheless, they made it to the playoffs and won Game 1, and then lost pretty convincingly every other game to the Bucks in the bubble. But things weren't looking that bad for them, honestly. That offseason, they inked up Fultz and Isaac long-term, and for not a lot of money either. Fultz got 3 years, $50 million, but the last year isn't fully guaranteed. Then Isaac got around 4 years, $69 million, and if he can stay healthy, that will be an absolute steal of a contract, considering he's a Defensive Player of the Year level player when healthy. But unfortunately, this season was kind of derailed for them, with Isaac going out in August with an ACL tear, and Fultz joining him only a few games into his season with an ACL tear of his own. So that left 2 of their best players sidelined for the season, and it also left them without a point guard. Cole Anthony has gotten quite a bit of run with the injuries, and as I said before the season, his percentages are pretty ugly. 37% from the field and 32% from 3, which is almost 47% true shooting, so yikes. He also joined the injured list too though, leaving the Magic really without a point guard. And I mean that seriously. They had to reach for G League guys on 2-way contracts to play some point guard minutes. So what once looked like a semi-promising season was completely derailed, with them sitting comfortably under 500 for a lot of the season. So this was the year the front office finally decided to do it. They were very active at the trade deadline, very active. In the video I made about them towards the beginning of the season, I said they had the pieces of a solid playoff team. They just needed to tear down and rebuild around Vucevic, Fultz, and Isaac, because that core could make you a decent playoff team with the right pieces around them, in my eyes. So I was not at all expecting what happened next. So picture this. It's trade deadline on Thursday, March 25th. It's pretty dead so far. Only the Nuggets traded for JaVale McGee, which is a pretty underrated move. But I'm pretty busy, and I check my phone and look at Twitter for a minute while I can, and the Bulls traded for freaking Vucevic. I mean, I didn't think he would be traded simply because of the value discrepancy between the Magic and other teams. But no, the Bulls felt very differently. They traded Wendell Carter Jr., Otto Porter Jr., and 2 top 4 protected first-round picks. I mean, I knew Wendell hadn't been that good this season, but he still has serious potential to me. He's like a veteran in a young guy's body. He could be the next Al Horford type player to me. They also took on Al-Farouq Aminu's money and gave up 2 first-round picks while being 19 and 24. And all around, I was just really surprised about the move. But no, that wasn't it. Aaron Gordon had been talked about for a while at that point, and I figured him and Fournier were going to the Celtics for a couple of first-round picks. I was wrong about that one too, because Aaron Gordon went to Denver for Gary Harris, RJ Hampton, and a 2025 top 5 protected Nuggets first-round pick. That's also top 5 protected in 2026 and 2027 if it doesn't convey any of those years. I think that's a pretty good return for someone who has been good all year, but he'd run his course in Orlando at that point. Then they kind of sell low on Fournier by giving him to Boston for 2 second-round picks that I can't seem to find the specifics of. I think they're 2023 and 2027 picks, but I could be wrong. They probably won't end up being anything. That also created a $17 million trade exception though, which could be pretty valuable. That could allow them to take on bad contract for assets without actually trading anything. So they turned Nikola Vucevic, Evan Fournier, Aaron Gordon, and Gary Clark into Wendell Carter Jr., RJ Hampton, Otto Porter Jr., Gary Harris, 2021 and 2023 Bulls firsts, and a 2025 Nuggets first, 2 future second-round picks, and a $17 million trade exception. My first thought after this whole thing was still really pure shock, mainly about the Vucevic trade, which puzzled me a little bit for Chicago. Not that I didn't like it, but I've already said what I had to say about that in my video about the Chicago side of things a couple days ago. But for the Magic, I absolutely love the trade if they really are going into rebuild mode. As I've said already, Wendell has the potential to be a really good defensive center in the NBA, With some good playmaking and potential to be a floor spacer if his three-point shot ever comes around, he's been taking them, they just have not been going in. We'll talk a little more about long-term fit in a minute, but I just really liked that move for them. The Aaron Gordon trade was pretty good too. Gary Harris was really just salary filler in this move, but honestly, I think under Steve Clifford, he could be a really useful tool defensively. Hopefully his offense can come around again. We've been hoping that for like 3 years now, but you can still hope. Then RJ Hampton is a really intriguing guard prospect who now brings some competition to that spot. Fultz is obviously going to be the starter right now, but that does give Cole Anthony some competition. Cole is still injured right now too, so RJ is going to get some run almost immediately, and maybe we'll see this guy flash the potential he showed in high school. That 2025 first is also intriguing. Who knows where the Nuggets team will be in 4 years? I'm sure they'll be good, but even if it's not that great of a pick, it's still ammunition to add to a trade in the future. Not to mention how good the Bulls picks could be if things don't work out for them. To talk about the long-term fit and the future of this team though, things are looking pretty good. Next year they're still pretty close to the salary cap, even with Wendell's almost $7 million option included. But the next season, even factoring in about $10 million worth of team options, not including their potential draft picks, they'll have over $40 million in cap space. Factor in a potential $15 million for Wendell, and that's at 25, which is still good enough to get you a couple pretty good guys or one good one. They'll still have Isaac and Fultz under contract, and that's 2 years for RJ and Cole to develop. Not to mention a top 4 pick this season probably. So in a couple years, the Magic could be looking at getting back to being a semi-competitive team already with a much younger, probably better core of players. Can we talk about the defensive upside of this team too? Wendell could be really good, and Isaac paired with him in the front court could be something terrifying. Wendell isn't much of a shot blocker, but as a team defender and just in terms of some switchability, that front court is terrifying to think about. Fultz is also a pretty decent defender with room to grow, and don't forget Okiki, who could become something defensively next to those guys. I mean, the Magic hang their hats on defense, and assuming Steve Clifford is still around at that point, they could really be good on that end. It's fair to assume that he probably won't be around, but either way, I think they could be really good. Now, to be a bit skeptical about it, this whole thing is very dependent on health. Isaac has been in and out of lineups his entire career with injury, and so is Wendell. That's 2 huge building blocks for them that are not guarantees to be on the court. They also still have to nail their draft picks and any trades or signings they make in these next few years in order to get to that spot. They still have to decide if Clifford is the coach for this rebuild too. Sure, he's really good with the fundamentals, which in turn limits turnovers and results in largely disciplined defense, but is he just going to play the young guys? Is he going to prioritize development over winning games at times? Because it doesn't seem like a very Steve Clifford thing to do, considering Mo Bamba. I wouldn't be all that surprised if he doesn't end up staying. He'd be a decent coach for a team whose objectives lean more towards winning. So to recap, I really like what they did during the trade deadline. Not only did they get several picks, but they managed to get a really good prospect in return for their best player, on top of potentially a couple of really good picks. I thought they had a bright future before, and I still think they have one now. So, be happy, Magic fans. Things are looking up.